Welcome. This is the final video of Info 2 that deals with biases. If you have not watched the other short videos, Intro to Bias and Types of Bias, please do that first and then come back to this one. My name is Jorge Leon, and most likely I caught up with you all during Information 1, misinformation, satire, fake news, and some of the strategies there. The point of the combined two sessions is to assist students through the understanding of some of the barriers, some of the things that we tend to inherently run into when we are trying to process new information, when we are trying to engage with things that are thrown at us in a fast-paced world. So we're going to talk a little bit about those same strategies and how they apply to things like biases. We're going to be talking about bias, not prejudice. Oftentimes, the terms are used very interchangeably. This is not inherently wrong, it is just misleading. Oftentimes, biases are perceived as something negative. They can lead to prejudice behavior, but a bias is something that each person has, and the more research we look into it, the more different types and kinds of biases we discover. So we're going to talk about this as something internal, not something about what others do or what are the negative behaviors on it. A talk for prejudice can be done at a different time. We're going to do similar to the earlier class, the Info 1 session, and we're going to talk briefly about some of these terms. You don't have to go into all of them. I just want to take a few minutes for us to discuss some of those strategies and how they apply in the context of a few examples. In particular, we're going to be focusing on things like the conscious bias and the confirmation biases. So for a quick refresher, in Info 1, we talked about some of these same strategies. And I think it's a very short list of very simple things that we can do, but it's purposeful because these are items that we need to keep in mind when we're finding new information or when we want to put a stop or a break on an emotional check before we respond to an angry social media post or somebody sent forwarded to us. So we'll be talking about the value of things like reverse image searching, lateral searching, so searching for other sources that confirm the same basic information to reinforce what you are seeing. We're talking about how we can confirm with experts and if we need to stop before we repost something and think about what the aim is. Is it meant to aggravate, agitate, or elicit an emotional response from us? One of the first ones that comes up is the discussion about confirmation bias. And confirmation bias at its simplest, most basic core is the tendency for us to process information in a way that conforms with things that we already believe. Short and simple, we're more likely to believe something that conforms what we already know. Things that we grew up with, things that we like, things that we don't, things that we dislike. A very simple example here is there's an article that says fake fish study finds nearly half of sushi served at restaurants is mislabeled. Very clickbait title, right? Super out there title. Now in our hypothetical example, we have a student, Anne, who never has liked the idea of eating raw food, raw meat, and associates eating raw fish and raw meat as something unhealthy. For somebody who has that pre-existing confirmation bias and sees this article, what's going to be their first thought? Are they going to be objective? Are they going to try and think about the place where this article is coming from or who's writing it? Most likely than not, they're just going to take it at its face value, even look at the picture and have that confirm their belief. Let's talk about some strategies. I'm always going to encourage us, like I did in Info 1, that we should read beyond the title. Look at the article. What does it actually say? Who is the author? Where is it coming from? Are they actually saying that half the fish in restaurants is fake, or what are they bringing to here? And if, like we see here, it's talking about another article, a Times report, what does this article add to this story? What is their contribution, or are they just parroting what that other report says? So, is there new research? Are they building on it? Or should we just ignore this one and go to the original story? In this case, I think it's important for us to compare what the Times piece has versus this National Post. We're going to find that the Times article has a less clickbaity title right off the bat. Their title is more focused in on the region and less of something to elicit an emotional response. Right in the middle of the text, we also see that they are talking about a subsection of restaurants in an LA region, and that they are finding an original research out of a journal, Conservation Biology. So now we are seeing where the original source is coming from. So in this instance, kind of keeping our emotions in check, finding out what more information we can get. We can even go back and actually find the original article in Conservation Biology and see what it talks about fish DNA and how much is it compared to the region there. But this gives us a place for us to go without just first assuming that the title, let me go back to that one, fake fish, with no reference to where or restaurants or why it's considered fake fish. In our next example, we're going to talk very briefly about two effects. And so these are less biases and they're more about things that we might see on common media or common ways information are presented to us. Framing effect and the anchoring effect. The framing effect is something that the marketing business has been using for years, and you probably will recognize it pretty quickly. It's just that we're more susceptible to things that are framed in a way that's positive to us. When you see something at a store, if it's a fat-free yogurt or a tube of meat, when you see that the packaging says that it's 80% fat-free, it's going to be more positive, and we're going to perceive it more positive than if we see that a container says 20% fat, even if that's the other part of the total sum of the packaging. So it's a framing effect is something we always have to keep in mind. How is information being presented to us? We can always find multiple sources and see if the language of that title confirms the same thing or if it's being packaged for us. The second one is something called an anchoring effect. And this is more on us heavily relying on initial information. So if we see a review about a TV brand we've never heard before, we tend to rely on that first bit of information first. It's just something about, and you can think about how maybe at your home, your family's always been a Ford family, or your family's always been a Dodge or whatever. Those kind of behaviors anchor in us when we see new information. The last two that I think are important and relate back to some of the conversation in Information 1 are themes of apophenia and the data correlation. And this goes back a little bit with the conversation about conspiracies and how people will bridge information together to create what can sometimes feel as outlandish claims. Apophenia is very simply the tendency to mistakenly perceive connections and meaning between things that may be unrelated. A very simple example is when people will see faces in the sky, or a man in the moon, or you see a piece of toast that somebody says looks like a famous person. These are fairly positive and artistic interpretations of something like apophenia. The more negative side of this is when somebody has a convinced interpretation that there are related connections between things, and they can connect the conspiracy. So, a heat map that shows uh, the same dots as a 5G network and why people are getting sick, they connect it to mean that that 5G is causing an illness. Uh, the part that connects with that as well is the data correlation component. We talked a little bit about this in Info 1, but sometimes we have a need or a capacity for us to believe when we see information presented to us as graphical data. It's the same thing as when we see a picture and it confirms for us that story. So we have to be very careful for it, because there are oftentimes reasons for this statement up here. Let me move this picture out of the way. That correlation does not necessarily equal causation. Sometimes it does, but oftentimes it does not. A very simple example, and I know this is just kind of be facetious and to point out the fallacy here, is on the left. The sales of ice cream go up around the same time that forest fires go up. Coincidence? Yes, very much so. And that's kind of the point. The graphs can sometimes point the same thing, but doesn't mean that one causes the other thing. There's always a third factor or something else. It's very likely that a simple explanation like ice cream sales go up during hot months, forest fires go up during hot months. It does not mean that ice cream sales and forest fires are connected. Uh, there are complete sites out there, and I'm giving credit to where I found both of these because you can go back and find them. But there's complete sites dedicated to creating weird connections where just the data matches up pretty closely, and you can make assumptions like, the number of people that died from falling out of their wheelchair according to CDC data compared to the cost of potato chips. Are they connected? No. Do they have similar correlative data points? Yes. And going back to those strategies, when we see something like this on social media that somebody's pointing to it as an example of proof for something, we first have to give an emotional check. We have to stop ourselves and assume, why is this kind of catching us? Why is this bothering us? Is this meant to elicit an emotional response from us? The reality is that the strategies are very simple, just like what we've done before. Be very leery or wary of stories that try and link two or three things that are very disconnected as solid proof of something. Don't, just go off of somebody else going, I did the research. See what other fact-checking sites are out there. Use multiple sources. It's the best way to feel confident in the data or what you guys are locating when you're researching. Definitely avoid sources that you can't verify their authenticity and that you can't trust who is funding or where their authority is coming from. And it sounds silly to end with this, it really does, but don't feed trolls. Any engagement on social media, and most of you that use social media on a daily basis and multiple platforms know this, any engagement, positive, negative, yelling at the person online, ends up creating another bit of data for the algorithm to continue sponsoring that bit of misinformation or that story. So just be careful with what you guys are engaging out there. You have several librarians here at Library Services and Axe Library who can help you out. Come find us if you need any help. Thank you guys. Have a good one.